Hey everyone, welcome back. I've finally managed to get my hands on a magnetic Detron and maxed it out to 60%. Why magnetic? Well, that's obvious. The weapon is already innate radiation, and going toxin or viral saves one less slot than going magnetic. You would build Tenet Detron for magnetic and viral anyways, as it can't slash, so don't bother with that. Today I'm going to show you six different ways you can use Tenet Detron the best, so let's hop right in. Let's compare our new Tenet Detron to the Mara Detron. The first thing you'll notice is that our critical chance has been boosted all the way to 18% from 8. This is actually pretty big as our critical multiplier finally matches a real weapon. It's gone up to 2 from 1.5. This makes crits much more impactful. The next thing you may have noticed is the magazine has dropped down to 6. With a reload of 1 second though, this isn't really a big issue, but the reason DE probably dropped the magazine size is because of the new alt fire that dumps the entire magazine like Pandero. More on that later. The Tenet Detron actually shoots 10 pellets instead of 7 like the Mara Detron, so although the status chance has dropped to 10 instead of 13.7, the overall status on a per shot basis in practice is actually higher. Yes, the Tenet also has slightly worse fall off, but Exilus easily fixes that. You're not trying to snipe with this thing anyways. Finally, while the Tenet appears to have lost some base damage to 260 from 280, you need to remember with a full Lich bonus this goes all the way to 416, or essentially 1.5 times more damage. The biggest changes to the weapon in my opinion is the massive damage increase in the capability to actually crit properly. This makes the weapon both more consistent and significantly stronger. Combining this with the new altfire turns the Tenet Detron into a very high burst weapon that only the beefiest enemies can stand against, so let's take a look at the 6 best ways you can use the new Tenet Detron. First up is Mag. I wanted to show her first as this is the first time she has featured on my channel. Besides this, the frames after her will be shown in increasing effectiveness with Tenet Detron. This is your standard magnetized build with a little bit of updated flair. The build has decent survivability, and I've chosen to focus more so around range to really get the most out of her bubble. Coupling this with a fair amount of duration lets you get the most out of her polarize to CC enemies with counterpulse and give yourself some more space to reset your shield gating. We still need some strength on the build to keep the magnetized pull fast, so I slotted Umbral Intensify. If you feel too threatened on this build, feel free to drop Constitution for rolling guard. I've chosen Energize because magnetized setups tend to be somewhat energy hungry. Alongside Polarize casts, Combat Discipline and Arcane Avenger come together here really well also to turn the Tenet Detron into nearly 100% crit chance. I know at this point that this combo is literally my signature, but trust me, it works extremely well here. Alternatively, you can go with a normal aura like Corrosive Projection or Enemy Radar and slot Arcane Pistolier instead. Getting headshot kills and magnetized bubbles happens somewhat often, but keep in mind Detron already only has a 1 second reload, and the new Merciless Arcanes will cut that down to 0.8. There's already a delay before you can alt fire again even with Pistolier, so I decided to go with Avenger instead. This is my Detron Mag build. It's just basic radiation, magnetic, and corrosive. We have our base damage Hornet Strike, but once Galvanized Shot is fixed, it will go over this slot instead, as even with 2 status effects active, after 3 kills, this gives 240% base damage and surpasses Hornet Strike. And we have 3 elements here. Because the weapon can actually crit now, we're slotting both primed mods. You can see we reach 51.7 critical chance, and with Avenger this goes all the way up to 96.7. As the Tenet variant has real critical damage stats, this will let us take full advantage of that sweet 4.2x crit multiplier, as Detron has no way around armor. I haven't unlocked the Exilus slot, but if you so choose, you can put Fatal Acceleration or the equivalent to Projectile Flight Speed mod in here. With the kill rate on Tenet Detron within Magnetized, Secondary Merciless is a natural choice that will help with ammo usage and speed up that reload even further. You can bring whatever pet you want. I'm bringing Panzer on basically all the builds shown today unless I say otherwise. Now let's showcase this thing. It isn't a instant one-shot, but compared to the original Mara Detron, this is a huge step up in its capabilities. I would expect this to work exceedingly well in all applications, including Steel Path. If you want to go endless, well, you can pair this with Helmet, Breach Surge, or Fire Blast to take it even further. But as it stands, this is a massive improvement. You can also run Fracture and Crush to have better scaling against armor, but that will also require 160 strength, so I didn't want to go that route. Remember, the Detonate on her bubble also does massive damage, so you don't really need to kill them instantly if you're going for endurance. On the other hand, there are better options for Mag though. Actually, I'll give you a sneak peek on what the next video will cover. So yeah, there are better options. But hey, Tenet Detron is still super legit for mag. Next up, Banshee. These are dipping into the builds I've showcased with Mara Detron before, but updated for the current mainline. The principle is to ensnare your enemies and armor strip them, in this case with Sonic Fracture for full strip, then prime and explode with their magnetic shells. I don't want to screw up my other builds, but basically the empty Excalus should be prime sure-footed. This is another combat discipline Arcane Avenger build to push Detron to 100% crit. At least 143 strength is needed to full strip with Sonic Fracture, so if you can fit it, you can run Umbral Intensify instead of Transient Fortitude so that Ensnare lasts longer. This would also let you drop Constitution for Augur Reach for more Ensnare range. The build is somewhat spammy on ability, so I've opted for Fleeting Expertise since we don't need too much duration. Sonar is entirely optional but gives you even more scaling. The only thing that has changed on the Detron build is we are running Thermagnetic Shells instead of Seeker. Once again, we will be replacing Hornet Strike with Galvanized Shot once it's fixed, and you may be wondering why I'm not running Seeker on a Detron build. Well, that's because this one is actually crit viable unlike the Mara Detron, so it kills much easier. It also cost me 2 extra mod slots, making the build bloated. But we also gained an Altfire, and I'm expecting the rapid burst damage with the increased base damage and crit viability to be able to take out the first enemy you aim at before your shots get blocked. Finally, you may be wondering what I'm using to propagate the viral status needed to one-shot everything with Thermagnetic Shells. I've shown you Zorus before, but today I will feature an Exodia Contagion Primer. You may be wondering why? It's because the Altfire of Tenet Detron cannot be used while dual wielding, as this will detonate Zorus in flight instead and you will lose all your combo, which is not what you want because then your Weeping Wounds is gone. So instead, I'm opting for this Contagion build. You still want to build this up to 12x combo, but once you do, it'll sit easy with Neramon Power Spike. So let's test this out. You walk up to your enemies, cast Ensnare, pop a Sonic Fracture, and then throw your Contagion, re-aim and dump the Altfire. If you don't want to use Contagion and pick Zorus instead, you can also pace your Detron shots manually, but I find the Altfire just makes it much more comfortable. Less carpal tunnel in exchange for having to jump around with Contagion. But hey, moving around means you're less likely to get hit. Let's take a look at our third frame, Zephyr. Once again, a combat discipline Avenger build. At this point, I'm sure you noticed the trend for these Tenet Detron builds. This is your typical Tornado and Airburst rounds build I've shown you before. I've also subsumed Fire Blast on to deal with armor. This build is actually strong enough you don't need to use a viral primer unless you're doing endurance. At 190% range, Airburst will drag in any enemy within 15.2 meters. It's also spammable and makes it easy to group 2 or more clumps together. With how heavily this build utilizes Zephyrs 2 and 4, and 3 can still be used protection, I opted for 160 efficiency and some positive duration alongside Arcane Energize. Beyond that, it's just high range and rolling guard. I use Transient Fortitude to offset overextended and allow Airburst rounds to still cap 500% base damage easily, but you can also slot Umbral Intensify instead if you can fit it. Rolling Guard and Airburst will be all you need to keep yourself alive, as you already have Jetstream. On Detron, this time we're actually going to drop the Thermagnetic Shells for Jolt, as the Tornadoes of Zephyr will do the AoE for us. And once again, we will be dropping Hornet Strike for Galvanized Shot once it is fixed. The Contagion build hasn't changed either. For how this build works, you simply approach your enemies, cast your 2 as needed to get them all together, and either cast Fire Blast or use Contagion to prime Viral. Only one of these are needed unless you're doing Endurance. Then cast your Tornado and dump your Altfire into it. Simple as that. The Tornado does linger around for a bit, so you can continue to use Contagion or Fire Blast more enemies as you drag them in with Airburst again. Combining Fire Blast casts with Contagion will be all you need to handle Endurance and level cap, letting you strip them down to size and still piling on viral status. Now we're getting into the classics. This is Ember. This build focuses on using our Fire Blast to strip 100% armor, and we will have our Immolate up permanently and just juggling Inferno and Fire Blast casts to keep our energy economy alive. Frequent usage of Ensnare, her 3 and 4, and Active Drain when her 2 is full means we're gonna run 175 efficiency. We'll also be pairing it with Arcane Energize. Combat Discipline and Avenger rears its head again like usual. Fire Blast is honestly the best armor strip in the game, and we need to supplement that with some range. If you have spare capacity, I would recommend running Prime Continuity here instead to get better duration out of Ensnare CC. If things somehow get too hairy, well, you still have Rolling Guard once again to rely on. This really is a complete build and even has an extra slot for Vigorous Swap in case you want to prime with Cedo instead of Contagion, but also helps on the damage side of things. If you want to use a Cedo primer, this is the build I use. Our Detron build has not changed, and neither has the Contagion primer, so let's move on to the showcase. You want to make sure your immolate meter is active and generally will play it with capped or nearly capped out. Just find your next victims and cast Ensnare, then cast Fire Blast. Now prime them with your primer of choice and alt-fire your Tenet Detron. Instant nuke, easy peasy. Sometimes the most basic builds are the most effective, and I'm quite fond of Ember's playstyle. As we have Vigorous Swap, this build also works well with Cedo, so let's try it again. You have your immolate up, cast Ensnare, Fire Blast, shoot the alt-fire, then swap, then dump the alt-fire again. Actually, since set on your pet would be handy here for the amount of weapon swapping you'd be doing if you choose to run Cedo as your primer. 5th frame today, Frost. This is the literal cold counterpart to Ember. Instead of stripping with Fire Blast, we will be stripping with Avalanche instead. This time, we finally aren't running Combat Discipline because I need 250 strength to full strip with Avalanche. This is done with Growing Power, but this also means we can free up our Arcane slot. You're free to run Arcane Precision or Pistolier here. Up to you. With the amount of CC going around, Avenger probably won't be too reliable anyways. This build is a lot more expensive to run at just 100 efficiency and you're casting a 4 instead of a 3, and you may want to consider dropping Natural Talent for a Streamline. Otherwise, you will have to be careful about your Avalanche casts as they burn 100 energy a pop. To compensate, I did slot Overextended for some giga range. You'll be freezing everything around you in a 28.5 meter radius, which is much more than Ensnare would allow. This will also give you some breathing room. Enemies are only temporarily stripped for the duration, but as Avalanche is the final cast in the rotation, 78% duration is more than enough. Note that this build does not have Rolling Guard, so it is a riskier play than Ember. You will have to sacrifice Overextended for stretch so that you can drop Transient Fortitude for Rolling Guard if you want to do this. The Detron build, still the same. The Contagion build, still the same. Damage showcase time. You basically walk up to an enemy, tag them with Growing Power, cast Ensnare, and then Avalanche immediately after. Then you throw Contagion where they're getting sucked in and dump your Tenet Detron. It is a little bit more complicated than Ember's, but it's still very quick to execute. It should turn out identical to the previous showcase and nuke everything easily. Did I mention bringing Panzervault with Phylas will help a lot so that it still works even if you forget to throw your Contagion for viral procs? Finally, we have our 6th frame. This one is Zaku, our prankster. The empty slot is supposed to be streamlined. This is another Combat Discipline Arcane Avenger build. You need at least 200 strength to full strip with Gaze, so that's what we went for. What's interesting is that we can even ensnare the Gaze target, but with the tweaks on this build, it isn't always necessary either. I've subsumed ensnare over as 2 this time, lock, because we won't be using Zaku for passive DPS, and honestly, Detron can easily kill faster than his lock guns can. Also, Zada's Whisper applies the thermagnetic shell damage, meaning that 40% HP damage will be scaled into Zada. At 204 strength, Zada's Whisper will add 53% void damage. So this means against unarmored targets, this increases thermagnetic shell's total explosion to 61.2% HP, which means a single viral proc will be enough to kill everything. Or 2 explosions even without viral will still be enough for the chain reaction. Super fun, I promise. If you're having survivability issues, you can drop Stretch for Rolling Guard. 160 range is still a solid amount and can lock down entrances to tiles easily. Despite the build having only 105 efficiency with Streamline in the empty slot, the energy economy honestly isn't that bad with Arcane Energize and Vast on time to freeze the duration of Zada and Gaze. So how does this one unfold? Well, you can have up to 2 Gaze targets at once, so the best way is just to Gaze targets the entrances to your tiles. You want Zada's Whisper up at all times. Once you lock down the entrances, cast Vast on time to extend their duration much longer. This way you only have to recast your 4 once every 30 seconds to keep both your 1 and 3 up. It's extremely nice not having to re-lock down your enemies at the start of the tiles. You can optionally cast Ensnare, but it also isn't always necessary as the extra damage from Zada is often enough to trigger the explosions earlier. Contagion is still helpful, if not just for spreading viral, but also proccing blast and CCing enemies. Even if enemies are this far apart, with Contagion and Zada, they will still all die from triggering thermagnetic shells. Alt-fire of your Tenet Detron is your friend, but feel free to use semi-auto shots if you so choose. And there we go, the 6 best ways to use Tenet Detron. What did you think? I feel it's a pretty decent upgrade from the Mara Detron, and we even get to see Meg in action this time. These setups are pretty stock, and there's definitely more potential you can add to them. Whether it be more buffs, more strip, or more status and damage, the possibilities are near endless. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always, as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Tempestari and the Sisters of Parvos updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm also preparing to get you the info first once more new war info drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? And that'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.